very kind words. Um, Mayor Frank is here from Anderson County. I'd like to thank her because she was one of the people who supported me in all those decisions.
Yeah.
And that really means a lot to me. And she's also been a mentor. She's been one of the people that I can actually call and ask for her opinion, ask for her input, because we think the same way about a lot of things. And unfortunately, in this world of politics nowadays, that's kind of rare. So she's been invaluable both as a friend, as a supporter, and as a mentor. So thank you very much. So when you think about the 4th of July, what is it really all about? It's about the birthday of America, right?
Yep.
I think you guys got it here. You got it figured out. You know, it's more than fireworks. It's more than hot dogs. It's more than cookouts. It's more than a day off from work. This is the most important secular holiday in our country. And it's important on a number of levels. It's important because we remember and we celebrate the events and the people that led to the creation of the greatest nation this planet has ever seen. A revolution, and it was a revolution, okay? Never before had government viewed the people as the master and government as the servant. Before, it was the king and you were his property. Completely different. We celebrate the people who made that possible. Our founding fathers. You know, when we look back in history and we see these titans of intellect and political philosophy, and we don't realize, you know, the courage that they had, because if they had failed, if they had declared independence, subversion, insurrection from the British Crown, and the Revolutionary War had not been successful, they would have been branded traitors and hanged. When they say that we pledge our lives, our honor, and our fortunes, they meant it. There was no turning back at that point. And there were various points leading up to and during the Revolutionary War. It's actually, the Revolutionary War, actually started before the Declaration of Independence. But nevertheless, there were points where their lives were in danger. But they did that anyway. Imagine that kind of courage. Okay? We just heard the words of Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. How many Americans would say that nowadays? Yeah, a few. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be the overwhelming sentiment that it was back then. My favorite founding fathers, Samuel Adams, who is the heart of all of it. Okay? The Sons of Liberty, he was the guy that drove the whole thing as far as getting everybody on board. Thomas Jefferson, in my opinion, the most brilliant man who has ever lived. President Kennedy once said he had a group of Nobel Prize winners at the White House. And he said, this is the greatest array of intellect that has ever been in this place at the same time, except for when Thomas Jefferson dined here alone. That's absolutely true. And then George Washington. George Washington is the most important figure in American history. Make no mistake about that. Okay? All of our founding fathers and founding mothers, they were all flawed, they were all people. But nevertheless, the courage that they had. If it hadn't been for George Washington and his integrity, we would not be standing here as citizens of a republic. Even if the Revolutionary War had been won by the Americans, by the colonists, we would still be subjects of a king, because that king would have been George I of America. He could have done that. Towards the end of the Revolutionary War, King George III of Great Britain asked his sources, or asked his advisor, what are our sources in the colonies saying that this George Washington is going to do after the war is over? Will he become king? They said no. He's going to go back to his farm. And George III said, if he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. That's what George Washington did. One of my favorite episodes of the Revolutionary War isn't taught in many history classes. In fact, how many of you have ever heard of the Newburgh Conspiracy? A couple in the back. Great, good. So the Newburgh Conspiracy was launched basically by Alexander Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, who was aide-de-camp to Washington. The Continental Army had not been paid in quite some time, and they were very upset about it. The war is winding down. They needed their money. Hamilton and some other senior officers were going to convince them to march on Philadelphia and take over the Continental Congress and get their money and basically declare themselves a military dictatorship, with Washington, of course, at the head of this army. Washington gets wind of this, and they're having a secret meeting. Washington finds out. So he walks into the tent. None of them expected him. And when he walked in, Kroger. Ladies, you can't just have one either, right?
Right here.
So when Washington walks in, it was like Dad found out you were doing something you weren't supposed to, right? And they all just kind of clammed up. And Washington asked if he could address them. And he was like a father figure to these men, had been through a lot with them. And he fumbles for a piece of paper, and he's trying to read, and then he says, "Excuse me, gentlemen," and he pulls out his glasses. And he says, "Not only has my hair grown gray in service of my country, but my eyes have grown weak." That was the end of the entire thing, because they realized how much Washington had sacrificed. And he told them he would not be party to this, and that they needed to stop, and the military would remain under civilian control. He could have said, "I'm going to be the king," and no one would have. That was the natural evolution of how things happened at that time. But because of George Washington, we got a republic. And the world changed. And we were able to spread liberty and freedom and these ideas all around the world, and they were all came out of this group of individuals. It was a revolution. We celebrate the document that launched this whole thing, the Declaration of Independence. In my opinion, the greatest and most important political document that has ever been written.
Amen.
And we often think it's a historical document. It's not. The Declaration of Independence is as applicable today
Yep.
as it was July 4th, 1776.
Yep.
It has the most eloquent enunciation of natural rights in history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all man, all people, all mankind are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Your rights come from God.
Yes.
They don't come from government.
Yes.
It drives me nuts when people say constitutionally granted rights. They're not. The government is granting a right. It's a privilege. And they can take it away. They can't take your rights away. So when President Biden says that your rights are not absolute, he does not know what he's talking about. He is talking about privileges. Your rights are absolute. Yeah, now, sometimes we have to figure out when we have conflicting rights, that's what we have courts for. But nevertheless, your rights are absolute. Okay? But there's an important part of the Constitution, that Declaration of Independence, we sometimes kind of gloss over. And I'd like to read that specific section. Twice, Jefferson talks about the right of the people to throw off tyrannical government. But the second time, he doesn't just call it a right. He says, "But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, if this is a design to reduce them, the people, under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security." What does it mean by duty to do that? And I'm not, make no mistake, I'm not talking about that's our duty right now. But why did Jefferson say it was a duty? There was also a saying at that time, and it almost became the motto of the United States, that rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God. What does that mean exactly? I think what Jefferson is saying is that liberty, free will, is our gift from God. I'm not a theologian, I'm not a biblical scholar, but the Bible says that we are created in God's image, right?
Mm-hmm.
But God is not physical. He can take physical form, but he's supernatural, right? So what does that mean that we're created in his image? I think what it means is we have free will. We have the ability to think. We have the ability to think rationally, to make decisions. We have the ability to change our environment around us. No other animal has that. We're the only ones. We have dominion over the entire earth. And I think that's what Jefferson is talking about. Tyranny is an affront to God because it takes our liberty away from us. And that's why he says it's our duty, it's the people's duty to throw off tyrannical government. And that's really important. As I've gotten a little older and more mature in some of my thoughts, and I've seen how spirituality, my faith, and politics intersect, okay? And for me, that was just an eye-opener. As I got to thinking about that, it was just very eye-opening that he would choose those words, and that's how all the founding fathers thought. You see, there's a higher law than man's law. It's God's law. Mm-hmm. And government is really there, for civil society, but government cannot overrule God's law, even though a lot of politicians think they can. So we celebrate the events, we celebrate the people and remember them. But I think it's also important that today we reflect and look upon our future and where we're going. Our country has never been so divided, I don't think, as it is now. Seriously. Okay. We have tried this middle way, this third way, for decades. This is the termination of that. This is the destination. This is where it ends up. Okay? Which is a country that's here and here. And there's no middle ground anymore. Let's take what's the hot button issue in the news right now, abortion. With the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, and the left went completely nuts, even though they probably didn't realize that Roe was not a law, it was a Supreme Court decision. And all that happened was that the powers over abortion was really returned to the states. And you have that whole Constitution thing, but never mind, I don't want to confuse any of the folks on the left. But it used to be, Bill Clinton once said, this is Bill Clinton, once said that abortion should be safe, legal, but rare. President Biden, not that long ago, said that a child was not a choice. Abortion was always a tragedy. That's not what they think anymore. They're no longer pro-choice. Now they're pro-abortion.
Yeah.
It's a cult of death.
Yes.
I don't know how else to put it. Last weekend, I guess over this weekend, in Market Square, there were some pro-abortion protesters. And I had a picture text to me. I put it on Twitter, of course, had to. But it was two women holding signs.
There's our first responder.
Yeah. So a couple women holding signs. And one of the signs said, God will judge your sins, not mine. Okay. The other sign said, if God could kill his only son, why can't you?
It's a lie.
I don't really know what to say about that. Even if I wasn't a believer, I'd probably not want to put that on a sign. But nevertheless, that's where the left is right now. They are so gone that there's just no middle ground. But what you're seeing you're seeing is another revolution, and it's a very bad one. It shouldn't be a surprise. Actually, about every 80 years, we have a revolution in this country. Okay, that's a really good book about that called The Fourth Turning, about the cyclical theory of history and how you can see these cycles, and they do emerge. So you have the American Revolution, then you have the Civil War, then you have World War II. All of those about 80 years apart. How far are we out from World War II? We're about 80 years. So we are looking at another revolution. And what we are seeing is the emergence of a powerful force, and it is cultural Marxism.
Yeah.
And the goal is to demolish our culture, our society, our freedoms, and it's all something completely different than what we've known, what has made this country great. Okay? You know, if you look at the issue of the LGBTQ and transgenderism, and I don't really talk about this a whole lot, but what it's really all about is eliminating differences among people. Okay? It's not about equality, because we can all agree on equality. This is not about that. This is saying that people are all the same, no matter who or what you are. Marxism didn't have classes, okay? Everyone was the same, no matter their talents, their gifts, their ability, no matter how much they wanted to work. This is the same thing, just a little bit of a different twist on it. And the reason for that is because they want us all to be cogs in a machine. It's a machine they think they're going to run. Unfortunately, many of my friends on the left do not understand they ain't going to be ones in charge of the machine. They're going to be right here with the rest of us. You see, I believe in diversity, okay? I believe that all people are equal, but we're all different. And that's cool. That's awesome. That's not what they believe. They believe that everybody should look different, but we're all really the same. And it goes to a very dark place. Our country is at a crisis and an inflection point, as I said earlier. It's going to be a revolution, a Marxist revolution that's going to take us to a very bad place, or it's going to be a renaissance of what has made this country so great. Individual liberty and freedom, dignity and respect, and celebration of the individual. We're going to have a choice in what the outcome is. That's the beautiful thing about this country. We do have a voice. Please use it, because we're going to need it. And may God bless us and bestow us with the courage and the wisdom to move forward as we need to do. Thank you all very much for having me here tonight.